Hey, good afternoon and good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from today. And happy holidays. Today, we have a joint webinar with Tonkean and Fin Analytics that we're very excited about. We'll be covering automation to orchestration, how to drive continuous improvement of your people, processes, and tools. So first, we have some opening remarks, which are happening right now. And then we're going to jump into our two panelists here that you can see below. And they're going to discuss how the two products, Tonkean and Fin Analytics, work together. Then we'll jump into our demo portion, which is why we're all here, cover a couple case studies, and open it up for Q&A. One important thing I want to mention is that this is a discussion more than anything else. It's two founders geeking out over their product. So we have a really awesome group of attendees here today. I can see you all joining as I'm talking. And we really encourage you to engage in the chat and Q&A section as well throughout the entire webinar. If your question or comment is relevant to what they're talking about at the moment, I'll jump in and we'll answer that question right away. Or we'll save it for the end for Q&A. Regardless, we definitely want to encourage that level of engagement throughout the entire presentation. And now I'll go ahead and introduce you to our first panelist here, Mr. Sagi Eliyahu. He's the CEO and co-founder of Tonkean. Do you want to say a couple words here, Sagi?
Sure. Well, thanks, Bree. Thanks for organizing this. Exciting to go through these topics with Sam. I think we've been geeking about this topic for many years now, so it's fun to kind of do this collaboration. Like you mentioned, my name is Sagi. I'm the CEO and founder of Tonkean. On a high level, and we'll see this through, but Tonkean is about actually simplifying orchestration of complex processes. And when we look at that automation growth to orchestration, we believe Tonkean plays a significant role. So we'll see a lot of that later today.
Thanks, Sagi. And then our second panelist here, Mr. Sam Lessin, the co-founder of Fin Analytics. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's great to be here with everyone. And again, as Sagi said, he took my opening line, which is that he and I have been geeking out about kind of the future of how a lot of these pieces fit together in the enterprise, especially for a long time. And so it's really fun. We were talking about it'd be great to kind of get a great group of people together and go through kind of how we think about this whole pipeline. And it's kind of fun to watch how our two companies have evolved in very complementary directions over the years.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for the introductions, and I will let you take it away from here. I'm going to disappear, but I'll still be available in the chat, and I'll jump back in for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Bree. Well, so I think the first thing we wanted to kind of, before we jump to the demos, is just to kind of give the high level of this topic, really, right? We're talking about automation. We're hearing the word orchestration. Many of you are like, what's all these new words mean? Why every few years you have a new word? I think Gardner had an interesting slide, which is what we're sharing here, as part of that evolution. And I think what's interesting about automating, using technology to improve operations and to improve work, there's just steps that we start from a very small, simple tasks, and we'll go all the way into reinventing and rethinking about business operations. And I think, especially as we look at Tonkean and Fin and as a complementary into this world, it's really about growing from a simple task to process and to across processes and across functions orchestration. So thinking about the problem of work not as a single task, but as an end-to-end effort that includes people and includes systems, includes processes, and therefore require more than just automation, but require an actual orchestration. So that's kind of just to kind of set the stage of where sort of the world is moving forward. And a lot of the business outcome benefits comes where we integrate some of those concepts into multiple parts of the business and start making that part of the fabric of how we optimize and create efficiency. And so, I think that's kind of tied well into how Tonkean and Finn works together. And so, kind of let you take this next slide, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing I think a lot about, I mean, you and I both come from kind of more pure technology product worlds and have gotten more and more involved in the operations space over time. And, the analogy I've been using recently is that a lot of the work you do in operations, it actually is a lot of like what you do in a software company, a pure software company on a growth team, right? Where it's a very iterative process where you're looking for the low-hanging fruit, addressing it, rinsing and repeating, measuring your outcomes, and kind of continuously driving through it. That's different than kind of how you think about pure product development, where you might try to make a giant leap in one direction, right? Or build something holistically. I think that's kind of the real realization of how these things fit together. Is if you think about this life cycle of using, for instance, Finn Analytics to have a really detailed understanding of how your operational processes are running to assess the situation, using Finn and Tonkean to program and test, kind of the improvements you're making, using Tonkean around the implementation side, and then using, again, a combination of our products around measurement and sustainability, rinse and repeat. This life cycle, to me, this is kind of the next product growth-esque life cycle, right? Where it really is, and that's kind of what comes down to with any complicated set of problems. And operations work, broadly can be very complicated, has a lot of inputs, is everything is about instrumentation, ranking opportunities, harvesting those wins, measuring their outcomes, and then doing that over and over and over again in an iterative process towards success. And so that's kind of how I think about this. And I think you and I have kind of discussed along these lines, like why this is such an exciting space, and also why it's so challenging in a lot of ways, because it really is almost like a new growth-esque type discipline applied once again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, bringing those methodologies from, the world of software where it's already been proven, there's plenty of tools, plenty of, do and do not, right? And into the world of operations where it's kind of new for many, right? That concept.
Yeah, and I think the newness, we'll get into this with the demos. I don't want to hold up too much, but like the newness comes from the fact that I think until recently, the measurement of operations work was so difficult that it was hard to think about it scientifically and optimize it scientifically. And frankly, the orchestration is also very complicated, right? It's a hard thing to pull off. The technology didn't exist. And so it's kind of like, if you think about growth hacking didn't exist in the year 2000 because the tools and the measurement didn't exist, right? That's kind of where we are now, is the tools are starting to exist for this type of operational optimization.
Yeah, I love it.
Cool. So maybe we can go to the next slide. I think I'll keep going here for a bit, and then we'll kind of, what we promise to keep the slides minimal. Let's just skip this. We'll talk about it off the next slide. But basically what Finn Analytics delivers is really three things. We do complete process instrumentation down to the click stroke of everything your team members are doing. We do it matched to the cases or what they're working on. And what that allows us to do is create a complete and rich data set of exactly how each person on your team is finishing work, that then allows you to do things like create immediately actionable operations insights. Know what does the best performance on this task type look like? What's the average performance? Why, how are tools used, so that you can literally rank and create effectively a matrix of sizings of opportunities of where things like automation or coaching or other types of optimization would be most valuable. And then we also, because of that, layer in effectively instant replay. So it turns out data will get you a long way, but almost everyone eventually, you want to see what's actually going on. So we allow you to instant replay any person doing any case, right, for QA, coaching, debugging, replay, and any sort of feedback you're giving. So we kind of mix that hyper quantitative layer of analysis, which you really can't get anywhere else across tools, with effectively instant, football style instant replay to know kind of how to improve your people, process, and tools. Next slide. What that actually looks like, which we'll go through again, like we'll skip this really quickly because we're going to just show, is we start with a plugin we deploy across every single one of your team members in, third-party, first-party environments, whatever, that sits in the browser, measures everything at the click stroke level through the browser at the DOM level. Again, no one else does that. We allow you to do this search and replay for specific moments and cases, and then we give you really deep analytical dashboards and insights, kind of almost like time and motion studies, if you're familiar with those, right? But at massive scale and obviously a much cheaper cost and more efficiently. Next slide. Yeah. And so again, like, I think this is the last one in our kind of little short demo before we actually show, but like, just to kind of level set, again, what we basically do with that data is we give it to you. So you can do all sorts of powerful, deep analyses on your own, match it with your own data warehouses and things like that. But really, when you think about it, we also provide dashboards and specific tools and methodologies for helping you with people, process, tools, outlier, targeted automation, et cetera, where we basically give you kind of turnkey solutions and say, hey, here's the opportunity from coaching in this specific category. Here's who to talk to about what. Here's kind of the process opportunity, exactly where, when you take an overall workflow, where's the most repeated work that's most expensive that you could easily automate, which again, or orchestrate in the Tonkean vocabulary. And then even things like outliers, like it turns out for almost all operations teams, there's like 5% of cases or work done takes 25% of the entire team's time. Knowing which those are, why, which people, which tools correlate with that, et cetera, is an incredibly low-hanging fruit kind of iterative way to start understanding where to slot improvements effectively.
Next. It makes sense, and it's basically, it's like we said multiple times, right? It's amazing how complementary this is, right? Because where we come in is basically saying, hey, there's complex processes are ones that are very dynamic, human-centric, and cross-functional, right? So that 5% you mentioned there, we've seen it with our customers so many times where a lot of times it's just even handoff between people, and sometimes it's just this few more clicks that didn't look that problematic, but at the end of the day, they take so much of the time and the effort, and so if we want to bring the implementation to sort of the next level, right? As you guys are making it now to see what people are doing and get the visibility to it. When you want to orchestrate complex processes, we believe you have to be able to enable more people to do that. And more people is the operation teams, is the line of business, not only engineering and IT. And so no code is sort of the important part here. And so we provide a platform for operation teams to do those implementation, to orchestrate the actions between different people and different tools. And so where it actually, if to put it in a visual, it's really that layer that connects the services, the data sets, the tools that you use with the business logic that is ever changing and is very unique for your process. And so we like to call it the operating system for operations because it abstracts the complexity of handling data and handling APIs and handling unstructured data into a simple no-code, drag and drop a process builder that really take on not only repeatable tasks in data, but also handoff between people and so on. And so we assume that you understand your process and you understand your problem, and that's kind of where the fit is really nice, because obviously Fin helps with finding where the problems are. So I think when it comes to how operation teams end with a Tonkean platform is really, first of all, the ability to create those changes and make those improvements much, much faster, which allows that operational velocity, which everyone sort of like are looking for, that growth that you mentioned. Reducing ID dependency, by the way, goes both ways, right? I create that sort of interface to the business, almost like a data access layer to the internal tools, allowing the business logic to resign with the operation teams versus within the code and within IT. That helps with much lower maintenance cost and again, faster delivery of value. And all of this, super important, is obviously being ready and working with enterprise. And we work with the Fortune 500 type of companies to allow that sort of platform to repeatedly and systematically create that type of efficiency. So I think we talked enough.
Yeah.
And we can kind of show a little bit of a real life scenario. This is obviously going to be demo environments, but it's actually based on a real life example that we had on customers from our side. So I think you're gonna start, and then I can show Tonkean after that.
Yeah, so I think we'll both show our products with like demo accounts, so you see how they work, and then I think we have kind of nicely kind of an example that I think might actually show how this gets deployed, which is cool. Before I dive in, no more talking, but I will say I think it's super cool. This kind of, when you think about like growth hacking and the mindset of empowering people, one of the biggest challenges is obviously security. And I think you said this in your product demo, but it really resonates specifically with me, which is you might identify all these opportunities, but the most important thing is to empower the people to actually then go iteratively fix them. And Tonkean is super cool because it basically allows you to do that and like free up your teams to do those things on their own, right? Without kind of hitting all the red lines that exist around security and privacy, which we both know very well. So exactly. I don't know. I think it's exciting. Anyway, let me share my screen, and I'll start with our little demo of a demo account. And what I'll do, so can you see my screen? I just want to make sure it's showing before I start riffing. Okay, great. So it's pretty simple. I'm running in a demo account here. This plugin gets installed into the browsers. We can do a Chrome based enterprise install for your company. It's super easy. It can be deployed literally in a matter of moments. And it sits here. And basically from a team member and agent perspective, it just sits here and is doing its thing. It's recording a data stream, which you can see is enabled. And then I currently have video and audio recording disabled. And there's also some annotation functionality. This is hyper configurable about exactly what you record and when. But in theory, the thing you have to know is it's sitting there and it's continuously logging. Like when I click login, it's logging that as an event right on the page in the browser. When I then pull open Fin, this is pretend I'm an administrator now. There's really only two functions you need to see. The first is obviously search. So I can say this is a company that's using Zendesk. Right, you can see every case ID. I can look up basically a specific instance of something happening by user, by customer, by case ID. If you set it up with a CSAT or an NPS score or other sort of indicators from your own data warehouses, you can do really cool things in terms of like basically pulling up exact moments. This is super useful for specific debugging, like a case happened, you want to know what happened. If something happened, you want to know exactly what happened, and all sorts of other things. But in the end of the day, the key point here that you really illustrate here is you again, like this is the instant replay functionality. So here I've just pulled up a case from Arthur Wilkinson. This is all scripted, which is why the mouse isn't moving. Like this is just a machine, a bot going around and scraping pages all day long and pretending it's doing operations work. But, they started in Zendesk. Now they're in, a spreadsheet. We can do multi-monitor recording, obviously. And then what you see here is I can annotate it, with a comment, a question, say, we need to look at this for automation opportunity, or this agent made a mistake here, like let's, comment back on them and have a discussion with them about it with real data. I can obviously share clips with my teams, things like that. But then really importantly down here, you see 3 tracks. You see the video being recorded. You see the case sessions, which is super cool. Like most tools that exist out there that do screen recording, they don't actually let you know what the person was working on. And we're able to detect that from the work and split up your workday into the different exercises. And then below here, you see actually every tool being used. So this person opened up this Zendesk case, started in the agent tool, and then ended up on YouTube, right? Again, how you feel about that or not, is a matter of your business, but you can understand how much time is going in different services in different places. Then they're in Slack asking a question. The real magic, again, we talk a lot about data, comes in on the data side. And I'll give you kind of a really quick version of this, but basically what we're doing in the background is building this continuous data set of every single click, scroll on every single service. You can see, okay, this is a person, by case session, by case, what service were they on? How long were they there? Was the UI refreshed? Could be a bug. What UI key presses, mouse scrolls, all sorts of actions, mouse clicks on different pages. We're getting heartbeats, so we know effectively, how the machine's performing, how the CPU, how much memory is available all the time. We know page load statistics, so every time you load a page, super valuable for remote work, for instance. How long is it taking to load, et cetera. And then we even have at the DOM of, as I said, every single time a button is clicked or something is scrolled, what was the element that was touched? This raw data is super powerful when you get into, by case, by person, doing fancy things. But then what we do on top of that is provide a whole bunch of insights and analytics as dashboards that are prepackaged, which companies can then customize. to understand things like true utilization, like by person, by tier, exactly where is, how utilized are people, where is time and effort going, handle times. So again, everyone thinks they know their handle time and they calculate it in different ways on different types of tasks. We can kind of give you the distributions by category, by person, by tier, and then even show you inside for a given process. So this process, again, fake data is, category printer fire. How much time is being spent on communication or in the knowledge base of a given thing, so you know where to target improvements and how valuable those improvements would be in terms of overall efficiency. We talked about outliers. I'll show two really quick things, then I'll hand it over to you. But like on an outlier side, I can basically show you with our tool, effectively by partner group, by case category, by person, how much time, what percentage of overall time is spent on outliers and where, and then even look further and say, okay, let's look at specific cases or specific moments where things took a long time and understand why. So like this, for instance, this is a missing or delayed package by this person at this time. It took 80 minutes. What happened? I can then pull up and start debugging effectively this thing in a few ways. I can obviously go rewatch the case itself. You see there's a lot of idle time here. The reason there's no video on this one is like Monique is a user that has video turned off in our fake environment. I can look at the person and understand, okay, where are they spending their time? Which services are they in? Which cases are they spending time in, and like which tools and documents are they using? And then I can even do a process exploration, which I think really matches with Tonkean well, where I say, okay, of case type missing or delayed package, right? In this case, what is the most likely process being followed? And then when things go wrong, you see all these help resources being used, right? What happened here and how do I debug this so I don't end up with these long tails? Whenever you see a long tail, that's an inefficient version or instance of that process type. There's a lot more to get into, APIs, control, like all sorts of really cool things. But at a high level, that's basically how this works, right? Is again, we're basically dropping this plugin, SOC 2, type 2, GDPR, HIPAA, we can get into all the controls around it, but it basically builds this data set and this video recording, which then allows you to understand how work's being completed, replay anything by case, by person, right? And then basically build the key insights you need continuously to look where the biggest next opportunities are for improvement, address them with a product like Tonkean and others, and then rinse and repeat and see the impact of the work you've done. So that's kind of how it works. Let me stop sharing my screen, if that makes sense.
That's awesome, Sam. Thank you. So we have a couple questions that came in. So Sagi, before you jump into the Tonkean demo, I think it's best if we just answer them now. And I'll start with the question for Finn because, Sam, you just gave your demo. So we have a couple questions here from Ronaldo. Ronaldo, thanks for joining the call. So does Finn have the capability to measure outside of Chrome browser, say on desktop or on-premise software that is installed on agents terminals?
Yeah, so good question. We video record all your screens all the time. So if you want to do instant replay, right, across all your tools outside the browser, we have that. We're very focused on instrumentation in the browser. That's kind of where we see the future of a lot of operations work. So when you want to get to the click level and the click stream level, that's where we go super deep. But what we find is that most of the teams we work with, even if they have a small amount of time spent outside the browser, we know activity outside the browser and we can obviously instant replay it, but we're not going to get click level data outside the browser, if that makes sense. So if you want to ask more specific questions, like happy to follow up with you separately about how we treat that, but that's kind of the high level answer.
Awesome. Ronaldo, feel free to continue posting additional questions if you have them. And then second question from Ronaldo for Tonkean. Does Tonkean have support of BPMN 2.0?
Short answer is no, but I'll show in a second how the how process builder in Tonkean looks like, and it's a little bit different. That's why it doesn't correlate one-to-one to the BPMN structure.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. And then a question from Corey. Corey, thanks for joining. This one's for you, Sam. Can Fin Analytics be limited to track clicks of only specific applications and websites so that the employer won't see YouTube visits, for example?
Absolutely. So this is actually something we spent a bunch of time and effort around. Is we basically have a very rich set of functionality to turn on and off video recording as well as clickstream recording on a whole bunch of scenarios. So that could be things like simple URLs, whitelist these domains, blacklist these domains. But it gets more fancy than that. Like imagine you're processing credit cards. Like I want to blank out the screen and not record anything when the credit card form is opened, right, inside the DOM or things like that. We have a whole builder and a tool set around allowing you to specify what gets recorded and what doesn't, and kind of all sorts of conditions by agent and by team on that. We're very proud of this. Like our tools around DOM instrumentation are pretty sweet for this type of stuff. I will say though, in closing, that like most teams come in with a mentality of selective recording, because the idea of recording someone when they're working, and like the process, the first reaction is, oh, I don't, my team wouldn't like that. But what we've found time and time again is not only does this make teams more efficient, but they actually love it in an operational environment, right? Because it helps them understand what best practice looks like. It helps the tools get debugged. Everyone feels like they're collaboratively on the same team. This isn't about penalizing people. It's about highlighting great work and looking for the best opportunities to improve process. So what we find is that most teams end up wanting to record more and more of the overall experience. And people are generally very on board with that, because you understand kind of what's what versus just measuring people on simple outcomes, which usually belie or kind of don't show what's really going on. So we're big believers that transparency is really great for everyone.
Well said. Thanks for that. Really good questions from Corey and Ronaldo, and please, everyone, feel free to continue asking them. But Sagi, I'll let you take it away with the Tonkean demo now.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, I think let me share my screen too now. So I think before I actually jump in, I'll show a little bit of the basics, but then you told me, Sam, the other day on this use case you guys had, where you found that people are spending a lot of time copying paste things into Google Translate to kind of, oh, I don't know this language. What language is this? And then, copying paste to Google Translate and back. And it's something that came up from you recording just any web page. And otherwise, if it was only on Intercom or Zendesk, it would be stay there and you wouldn't know where they're coming and going, right?
That's right.
And so we actually, I built a quick module in Tonkean to see how, if a customer found that, how easy it is to then go and automate that completely. But before I do that, just kind of from the questions that came up too, just kind of the basics about Tonkean. So we said, this is about empowering and enabling the operation teams to build and own their logic. So to build automations and orchestrate the process end to end. So that's kind of where the Tonkean modules comes in, and that's kind of where I'll focus on. But before that, there's two important parts of being able to orchestrate. One is visibility, which is the live reports on the automation itself. So like now the things that we are running automate automatically, like what happens there, what needs help. And then the baseline of it is really being able to connect to the different tools. And so the way we think about it is that the data sources are the interfaces that IT and engineering can create on top of their internal services and internal data. And so we're able to connect to any cloud application, spreadsheet, and databases, even email inboxes from a raw text perspective, or any custom or internal API. But when you do that, you actually define that sort of access layer. You can choose what, if we're thinking about Salesforce, for example, like, what are the data retention looks like for any of the entities. You can encrypt part of the data. You can define the actions that you can do. Can you create, or you can only read, and so on. So it's really sort of like keeping the control and security on the IT and engineering side, but enabling the business and operation teams to then use that as building blocks to create automation. And so there's a lot of examples here, but I do want to kind of talk about the example that we heard from you guys, because I think kind of it's pretty cool. So we have a module here that is basically real-time language translator from Intercom in this case, and it's basically monitors intercore messages and identifies that when there's a new conversation, trying to detect the language from Google, trying to identify whether it's English or not. If it's English, it just doesn't do anything. But if it's not English, then it actually escalated to an international support channel in Slack to allow them to basically interact with the message, but then translate it back. So this is kind of cool. So let me show you how it looks. So I have just a fake demo environment here just to have intercom message it, and I can say something like, and here I have Slack channel of international support, and so I can come here and say something like, "Hola," right? And what happens behind the scene, right, is that it will identify that there's a new conversation, and it will go to Google to try to detect the language. And if it's not English, then it will ask that channel. So if we go back here, we can see that a guest said hello, and it's translated from Espanol. What's cool about this, though, I can then reply to the customer here again in English and says, "Hi, how can I help?" And as I submit this here, again, it goes back to Tonkean here. As I clicked on that button, and then translate it from Google Analytics, from Google Translate, and go back to the customer. So I got a message here back saying, "Hola." I don't even know how to read it, right? But it's the same thing I said in Spanish, right? And so obviously I can go on and on.
Is that right? I'm kidding. I did my high school Spanish.
I don't know. I can do this in Hebrew and see how it works. I know I can be fluent in Hebrew. But the point of the matter is that in this example we went through Slack because the customer we were working on preferred to work in Slack regardless of the interface. But this could have easily be done directly within intercom interface, or in some cases maybe. If it's Japanese, maybe I actually want to create a Zendesk ticket at that point. And actually, I know that I have a Zendesk. I know I have a Japanese team, Japanese speaking team that use Zendesk. Then I can create directly a Zendesk ticket from here, and then monitor that Zendesk ticket too. And for every reply on that ticket, actually reply to the customer in intercom. So and that's kind of where I say orchestration is the important point, is that it's not only automating, this one task or this one task. It's actually thinking about the process and the problem end to end, and understanding that customers coming from one place, and there's multiple cases and multiple scenarios that might happen as part of this process that I want to handle. Being able to include both systems and different type of data sets, as well as applications with the intervention of humans, right? So this was done completely automatic, right? Detecting the language didn't require a person. But when and it's not English, that's when I actually want to bring a person into the loop to actually work with it. But the entire translation part is still gonna happen automatically, right? So this is I thought very cool example of like something you would only find if you have something like Finn that look through this, because the people might not tell you, I'm spending a lot of time copying pasting because they thought it's part of their work. But as you look through it, you're realizing that, hey, why are we spending so much time on this? Maybe we can just automatically detect and tag it, or maybe we can even go ahead and translate. And so there's a lot of different things you can do with Tonkean. So I won't spend a lot more time on that. But you can look at scenarios where it's actually unstructured data completely, where you analyze an email that comes to a support inbox or a legal inbox, for example, and identify with NLP, what type of request is this, and then decide again, automatically handle it or create a ticket for it, or maybe escalate it to a person. So those type of bridges between the different parts is what you can build with no code. Last thing maybe to kind of walk through and illustrate here is that every box within this flow can actually be one of three options. either a data action, right, which is what we've kind of talked about, creating a case, updating some sort of data set. Can be a workflow action, so more advanced capabilities like NLP and OCR, and training the model. Or something that is very unique to Tonkean is that concept of people coordination actions. So reaching out to a person wherever they are, so letting them stay in their interface and allowing the orchestration be coordinating between the different people in different teams, right? Another example can be you have a team that for type of request, they always find themselves going to Slack, going to the knowledge base, searching for the article, spending a lot of time, back and forth between multiple tools, or asking people for the same questions again. Where's my W-9? How can I find an NDA? Same request over and over again. Maybe we can attach to those requests and just automatically handle those. And that's kind of what you see here. Any request can come here to the legal inbox. And if it's one of those three, I'm trying to automatically handle them, and anything else, I'm just sending it to the legal team to handle. But if it's an NDA, maybe I can just reply back with an NDA template, or even generate it for them directly. So that's kind of the bread and butter of Tonkean and the process behind it. The last piece is the live report, which is also, I think, an important. And that's kind of where we said it's a combination of Tonkean and Fin as part of the cycle of measuring. So you can see the things that run through Tonkean and get the information and visibility into the execution of the process by Tonkean and orchestration of it. And then if you have analytics of Fin in the background as well, then you can actually see how did that actually helped over time. Like, do people stop now, going to Google Translate in order to translate? Do they stop asking for, or they keep on asking for NDAs, but the legal team doesn't have to handle this anymore by themselves, right? So those kind of things is super important as you continue to build those things. So that's kind of the core of it. I think that's maybe a good chance for some questions.
Let's do it. Let's start off with Maxwell Chen here. Got a question. Do you need engineers or technical teams of any kind to set up these tools? Sagi, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so that's the separation between the data sources and the ops modules. IT usually should actually create those sort of connections to the different data sources. And if it's a cloud application, that would be a simple API key or a service account. And if it's database, obviously it might require a little bit more. But in reality, the important part is the connection doesn't actually change that often, if at all. The things that change often when you think about automation and orchestration when it's across tools is the logic. And so the technical skills only really required to provide the access. And the ops module are completely no code, in the sense of, even if you want to write code, there's nowhere for you to write code. And it's all drag and drop, and allowing you to manage the logic without understanding even concepts of data flows. Everything is actually asynchronous and has context aware. So you don't even need to understand the modeling of the data in order to build those logics. And we like to say that if you can build formulas and pivot tables in Excel, you're skilled enough to build things in Tonkean.
Yeah, and with Fin, I think I just to answer the same question. You need someone on the IT team, right, to spend about 20 minutes to set up a few things, to do an enterprise deployment in Chrome, the browser. And if you know what you're doing, it's quite easy to do. We have support for this as well, but you need some permission, obviously, to push an extension, across your team. But it's very well and easy to do. The fastest deployment you could do is probably about 5 minutes. Probably takes the average team an hour to kind of go through the steps. Once it's deployed, we start collecting complete data immediately. right? So across all your tools, one of the big differences between using us and maybe the analytics you might get from a CRM is we're looking at your internal tools, your knowledge bases, everything holistically, as well as able to do kind of the case definition I showed you, which is very important to understand. Analytics, one of the big missing pieces is, sure, what people are doing all the day and what they spend time, but what are they working on? Like, how do you know where to target, right? That is completely automatic if you're using a major CRM like a Salesforce or a Zendesk or whatever. If you're not, we have very easy to use tools effectively that allow you to define it yourself, either from the URL, understanding or certain patterns in the DOM. But again, we'll support any setup that's necessary there. It's quite easy to do. Once that's all done, the data's clean, the dashboards are populated, you're off to the races. So, again, it's not quite zero code, up front, because you need to find someone to do the deployment on your team. But once you're deployed, I would say the same thing. I don't even think you need to understand pivot tables, but you need to be familiar with data, and then you get value from our tools.
Awesome. And then we have a question here from Frank for both of you, and we'll start with Sagi again on this one. Or maybe actually we'll start with Finn, because then we can show how it goes to Tonkean. Could you touch on any sales or HR use cases that both tools can solve?
Yeah, again, I think this goes back to, I'll kind of answer it, and again, to see how Sagi thinks about this, kind of with the way we started about like, what does this mentality of continuous improvement look like? To the extent you have HR people who are getting tasks in some form, and they're clicking through a series of tools or going through a series of steps, either documented or not, right? And the same thing with like a sales team or an SDR team that's kind of, maybe they're going to LinkedIn or they're prospecting and they're going to the next step and they're kind of doing a series of things over and over and over. The way to think about how a tool like Finn works is we'll help you, because we have this holistic picture of the process and the data and how each instance is completed, identify effectively where time is being spent, right? Where effort's going, which task types, which people might need coaching on which things or sub teams, what best practice looks like, and then how to optimize around that. But it's a little bit hard to say a priori what that is, right? There are generally true things, like in almost all teams, HR, sales, et cetera. I promise you there's a small number of case types or situations that are taking a disproportionate amount of time. Knowing why, right, and then knowing how to optimize that is valuable. We just showed an example on copying and pasting. No one ever thinks about copy paste, right? Like you do it 50 times a day, no one thinks about it. When you start adding it up on a big team, that might be costing you millions of dollars a year, right? So being able to size that and optimize that, whether your sales team is going from a LinkedIn field they're copying every time and putting it somewhere else, or a phone number they're moving from here to here. It sounds like a little deal, but these things add up, right? And so a tool like Finn, what they basically does is show you where those opportunities are, regardless of the actual end department you're in, right? Like almost all knowledge work has the same set of challenges and behaviors. So that's how I would think about it. Sagi, what do you?
And I think this is exactly the point, right? Is those gaps that are not, people not necessarily even attach dollar value to before they realize it, right? And a lot of it is that, like I said earlier, is that sort of human to human behavior or system to system, things that are not necessarily designed for your holistic process, right? Because a lot of the tools we use, or most of the tools we use, are package application. They come and they're supposed to serve a certain part of the business, a certain part of work. But every one of us work with like 200 different tools, right? And so, and different departments as we go through it. And so even in the sales process, that concept of again, if you're selling B2B, for example, that the contracts that you need in advance, an NDA or security assessment, those things, it's, everyone that runs sales or being part of any sales flow, there's a paper process, but in reality, what actually happens is there's so many back and forth internally just to make sure, like, did they already sign an NDA or not? Did they, when should they ask for an NDA? Well, they're asking for a security, white paper. Do I need an NDA for that or not? Like, things that you don't necessarily realize how impactful they are to your sales velocity. And sales velocity is one of the most important things that head of revenue cares about. But if you don't actually look at this as an holistic process that has multiple steps in it, And again, Fin can help you, find those gaps. And Tonkean can help you actually say, okay, so we know we need an NDA every time the opportunity gets to this stage, stage 3, whatever you call it. Why should I have the person ask for it? Why can't we just automatically generate an NDA from a template, automatically create a DocuSign for it, and send it, right? Maybe we can have some specific logic for us. It says, if it's a 7-figure deal, or it's a 6-figure deal, or it's a 5-figure deal, it's very different how we want to, interact with it. Every time we need, every time it's a big account, we need to use their paper, then we want to escalate to the legal counsel, whatever it is, right? Those flows are flows that are very specific to you, and they take a lot of effort and a lot of time. And it's normally quite hard to really automate them because they're so dynamic. So you can write code for that, but that's usually not something you're gonna invest in. So something where Tonkean comes in is the ability to automate those things. Same go to HR with, handling requests and offboarding and onboarding of employees, understanding what does a title change means. Does IT needs to do any provisioning? Do we need to change anything in the different systems? Those are the type of workflows and processes that we've seen many customers struggle with.
Yeah, and let me just also jump in. I mean, Frank asked a question, which I think I can answer, in kind of also riffing on this about, what's the best way to proactively find inefficiencies in operations? And I'd almost say, like, this is kind of the mentality switch. I think it's very hard to proactively find them. I think what you do instead is measure what the team is doing and find them through kind of a bottoms-up approach. And that's kind of the difference in my mind between this like growth mentality or this iterative design mentality versus kind of a top-down. If you go and ask most teams, where, like a person on your team, someone you trust, where are you spending most of your time? Where are you getting stuck? Like, what's the problem? They might give you a few good ideas, but the reality is like they only have this small visibility into their workflow. And people's memories of what actually takes time, very hard to account for. Like, they don't really know is the answer, even if you're really sophisticated. And that's why when you start taking a holistic approach and you say, okay, let's just be honest. Let's look at the whole picture, every person doing every workflow. Let's find what great looks like for a given thing. Someone's doing an offboarding. What does a great offboarding look like? What's the average offboarding? What's the difference? Okay, it's these tools or this thing, that's an example. Or it's even also there's little stuff like copy paste is an example, much more expensive activity than you might realize, also highly automatable. But also I'll give you another one, which is waiting for things to load, right? It turns out that most teams that we've seen and worked at, they're spending, not quite 10%, but a significant multi-single digit percentage of their time waiting for things to load, right? And so the team members might get frustrated by this. They say, oh man, our knowledge base is slow, or this internal tool, this credit card form takes forever to pull up. But it's very hard to actually prioritize fixing those until you're able to go to the engineering team and say, hey, did you know that waiting for this credit card form to load for our teams, it's not only annoying and causes people to slow down and feel less valued because the tools aren't working properly, it's literally costing us $3 million a year, right? Like, that's how you get things prioritized, right? And I think that's like another place where, again, in some ways, it's not about as much being proactive as saying like you almost do this measurement framework, right? Or take a measurement-driven approach and then an iterative approach to always going after, systematically the highest value workflows or the biggest areas of loss, fixing them, with a tool like Tonkean, right? And kind of stitching it to the right answer, and then proving to your leadership team, like, look, I just did save $3 million a year because this thing used to take forever to load and we fixed it, right? Or this took forever to kind of go through this process and we fixed it, rather than just saying, well, it feels better now.
Yeah, no, and I think I completely agree. And the one thing I can add to this is I like when you mentioned that people will tell you the thing that they'll just remember a few things, and maybe the things that just happened to them recently, and not necessarily the things that over time repeatedly happen and create a big difference between what's great is and what's okay. I think there's also a filter in people's minds of like what's possible to fix, right? I think the loading is a good example. People won't even whine about loading because they don't think about it as a fixable problem. You know what I mean? So the art of possible is also something that that I find incredibly exciting when you increase the bar. When you raise the bar of what's possible, and you add that sort of visibility to it, then in a way you become proactive by not being reactive, by not waiting to be reactive, kind of thing, not waiting for things to massively fail in order to take action, but actually understanding that, hey, we can fix more than we think. Let's try to measure it so we can actually start to iterate, and it is a mind shift, and I feel like that is probably the biggest takeaway point for, I think, for operation teams or folks from operations that are listening in, is how to really think about process and optimization from a different perspective, and being proactive by measuring and by enabling quicker fixes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that kind of leads me to another topic is what took place in both of your careers that made you want to build products that do increase efficiency? What kind of inefficiencies did you come across that you kind of thought, okay, there needs to be a product for this?
All of them. I
kind of have an answer to that. I think, I started most of my career has been in consumer software, right? I built a lot of consumer software and things like that. I had a lot of experiences with that, and kind of came to the operations world in a kind of circuitous route. But if you think about what technology really is, in the end of the day, the thing that is universally good, I fundamentally believe it's universally good to create more efficiency. Like, that is, at a purest level, what do computers do? They should make us more efficient. They don't always, right? Or there are places where that is really lagging. And so to me, I look at kind of what we do around measurement and things like that. And there's a whole bunch of angles of how I got there. I started my career at Bain & Company doing a bunch of time and motion studies. I've seen that the best practice in the software world. But I also think there's just something very, pure in my mind about just saying let's let technology be great at what technology does, right? And free people to be most focused on what people are great at, right? The future of the world in our minds is not AI machines doing everything. I think that's kind of a pipe dream, and also, I don't even necessarily know if it's good, but it is to help people have real data to work with, and be and be able to kind of focus their human attention on the most important things, right? And the best way to do that in our mind is to go from a world where you have a bunch of people operating in silos. They don't know what best practice is. They're doing workflows that were designed by someone who might not actually know what's happening on the ground. They're just using best guesses, to being data-driven, bottoms up, and helping teams kind of perform at their highest level across people, process, and tools, right? I think that's I find that to be a noble mission, and it's something that's worth spending time on.
Well, I couldn't agree more, right? Our motto is sort of people first, process design, and thinking about how to make people focus on the important things. So it's, this is obviously, as we started this conversation, something we, me and Sam have been talking about for years now. And I came from the same conclusion too. I was actually on the business, on the B2B side of things, building software for enterprises. And I was VP engineering and trying to kind of make things work with whatever we had. And software just didn't feel like it's designed for people. And it almost feel like these, software in enterprise is designed for data and to handle data, and not necessarily how people need to work with that data and work with each other. So it felt like there's a gap there. And it felt like there aren't a set of tools that allows you to improve processes, even if you know what's wrong. And so kind of naturally, I went to the other side of that same spectrum. Well, okay, even if I know, what's wrong, I can't fix it because I need to, build in a whole software system just to fix this one thing. I would never do that. So I'm kind of stuck on doing this manually. So Tonkean is basically trying to fill that gap. So it is that spectrum of that kind of spawned from the same exact noble cause, which I cannot agree more.
So noble. Awesome. Another question here from Frank. Could you talk a bit more about how your customers are using these tools to align goals across multiple departments? Sam, you want to take this one first?
Look, I just kind of go back to first principles on this, honestly, which is like everyone's kind of on a company together working towards the same goals, right? And so like what we found in general as well, some of our tools or whatever might start in one department, right? It's really a general approach that touches all departments, right? And can be, and that's both with workflows that go across multiple departments as well as just like within one company. I mean, I think my long-term big picture vision is that we'll look back in 10 years and we'll say, it's crazy that we didn't know how all of our teams were performing, right, to optimize them. And I'll go a step further. I think in 15 years or maybe less, we'll get to the point where if you're a young, energetic, excited employee joining the workforce, you're not going to want to work on a team that doesn't have tools like Fin Analytics and Tonkean. Like literally, you're gonna be like, oh, you don't measure work, so we can optimize it. It's like, oh, you don't build workflows in a dynamic. It's just it's gonna seem archaic, and people are not gonna want to do it because they're gonna know that one, if the work isn't being measured and isn't being continuously optimized, then like they're gonna get either they're gonna be held responsible for abstract things that don't matter, right? Versus like actually understanding what's happening on the ground. And they're not, it's kind of like, it's almost the difference between going from like saying you don't have performance reviews, right? As a team, right? You're just saying like, oh, like, please just come work here, but we're not going to understand. And we're not going to give you personalized coaching. We're not going to give you feedback all the time on how to improve. The tools aren't going to get better. And similarly, I think like, you know, if you tell someone, I think in 2030, if you tell anyone on any team that they're copying, pasting stuff between windows, they're going to quit, right? And they're going to go somewhere else, right? Because it's just going to be one of those things like, my life is precious. I want to be doing high value, important work. I don't want to be spending my time waiting for applications to load, copying and pasting things, you know, doing the same process that can be, it's going to feel insulting, right? To people to be asked to do these things. And so when you think about cross teams and cross departments or multiple tools, you know, in my mind, like, we'll end up in a world, and we are already seeing this, where like, you know, everything will work on these types of platforms. And, you know, when you go across multiple departments, you're going to have a conversation about, you know, the outcome you care about, whether it's in the customer service, maybe it's CSAT and NPS and, you know, the cost, the true efficiency of like the teams and team members or things like that. You'll be able to have like that kind of very big picture discussion with real data all the time. And it will make decision-making so much easier and so much more true ROI driven, right, than it is today, where someone will say, you know, our goal is to automate this percentage of workflows. And you're like, why? Like, does that actually impact the long goal? Or are we just ending up with more support in a different channel? Like, you'll be able to have a much more precise conversation. This is nothing new. This is what's happened already in other places. Like, I would argue engineering culture has already moved this here dramatically. So is growth market. It turns out operations work is pretty hard, right? It's pretty complicated. And so it's taking longer to get there. So that was a winding answer, but hopefully addressed some of your question.
Yeah, and I can add that silos in the futures, I don't see how that holds water too. Like you cannot have a CSAT goal, for example, customer satisfaction, and still think that this is only one department, you know, the supporting department goal. Like your product impact your customer satisfaction, your sales impact customer, you know, and those are not, this is not news to anyone, right? But if you understand that, but then you're not measuring and acting for that handoff and for that collaboration, then what do? Right? You're not actually working for that goal. So I completely agree. I think this becomes obvious that this is a cross-department alignment problem and not just, you know, siloed problem.
Awesome. Well, we're exactly at time here, so well timed, everyone. Thank you, everyone who joined this webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks to everyone who posted questions. Corey, Ronaldo, Frank, and Max. We appreciate that. We love your engagement. And thanks to our panelists, Sagi and Sam. And we'll see you soon.
Super fun. Thanks for having us. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.